Atlas sat down in the middle of the yard and didn't move. The decommission order was in Dean Cole's hand. 9 years of service. One bite. That was enough to end a hero's journey forever. Dean had walked 14 K9s to the same yard. He knew the routine. One decision. Quick. Final. But Atlas wasn't looking at him. The shepherd sat still and stared at the far corner of the lot, at a gray unmarked car parked against the fence. No growl, no bark, just that stare. If you've ever watched someone trust you with their life, you know what Dean saw in that dog's eyes. His hand hesitated on his belt. Standard, procedure. Then Atlas turned and looked directly at him. Not a plea, not fear, something else. What was in that trunk? Dean's hand stopped. 14 years, he had never stopped. Until now. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. Cedar Falls, Iowa. Tuesday, July 9th, 7:42 in the morning. The police yard was already hot, the kind that comes early and stays. Dean Cole had been on shift since 6. He hadn't eaten. That had been true most mornings since March, since the funeral, since the house stopped making noise. 49 years old, 14 years in K9, 8 in the Army before that. 2 tours he didn't talk about either. The decommission order came down the day before, signed by Sergeant Briggs. Atlas, K9 Unit 7, 9 years of service, cleared for euthanasia following incident report 2024-CR-118. One bite, one suspect, one signature. Dean read it 3 times. He didn't ask questions. That was the rule. You followed procedure. You didn't let it become personal. He had told himself that for 19 years. It worked every time. The unmarked car was gray, a 2019 Ford parked against the northeast fence. No visible plates. It had been there when he arrived. He hadn't thought about it. Atlas had. From the moment Dean walked him out of the kennel, the shepherd pulled left. Not frantic, steady, a constant pressure toward that corner. Dean corrected him twice. The dog complied, then drifted left again. If you've ever watched someone try to show you something you weren't supposed to see, you know what Atlas was doing. Cole, Sergeant Briggs from the far door, arms crossed. We good? Dean looked at Atlas, sitting, still, eyes fixed on the gray barn. Almost. Clock's running. 60 seconds before it became a conversation. 59, 58. Dean didn't move. Briggs called across the yard again. Louder. Cole, let's go. Dean's eyes stayed on Atlas. The dog hadn't shifted an inch. 9 years of training locked onto that gray car. Not on Dean, not on Briggs. On the northeast corner of the lot. On whatever was behind that dented bumper and those 4 inches of sealed steel. A trained K9 doesn't sit like that without a reason. Dean had learned that in his 2nd year on the unit. His trainer, a retired Army handler named Kowalski, said it once and never repeated it. The dog knows before you do. Your job is to slow down long enough to listen. Kowalski had been right about most things. Dean hadn't always listened. He had been fast his whole career, fast to follow orders, fast to close cases, fast to skip questions that would cost him. 2 tours, 14 years in K9, a funeral in March, 49 years of moving on. Right now, his legs wouldn't move. He took 2 steps toward the gray Ford, not toward Briggs, toward the car. Cole? The word came out flat, no question left in it. Atlas stood, first time since they had entered the yard. The dog walked 3 paces forward, stopped, and sat again. Closer now, not pulling, not barking, just moving, like he'd been waiting for Dean to take those 2 steps and was now confirming the direction. The back bumper had a fresh dent on the left side. Dean could see it from 8 feet. There was something else. A thin line of condensation on the rear windshield, running inside out. The kind that forms when something warm is sealed in a space long enough to change the air inside. It was 91 degrees. It was 7:44 in the morning. Whatever was in that trunk was alive. Dean, Briggs again. Different tone, not impatient, careful. The kind of careful that people use when they need you to stop without explaining why. Walk away from that vehicle. That is a direct order. Dean's hand stayed on the leash. He looked at Briggs. Briggs hadn't moved from the doorway. Hadn't reached for a radio, hadn't called for backup. He was just watching. Dean looked at Atlas. The dog was trembling. If you've ever had to choose between the order and the truth, you know what that second feels like. When your hand stops, when the math changes faster than your training. That second was right now. Dean pulled out his phone, no signal in the yard. He already knew that. He put it back. Briggs took 1 step forward, just one. Cole, I'm not going to ask again. Dean looked at the car. The condensation line on the rear window hadn't faded. He had been watching it for 90 seconds. Outside temperature was climbing. If the moisture was still there, the source in Chao was still active, still producing, still breathing. He did the math. Trunk volume on a 2019 Ford, roughly 12 cubic feet, sealed, 91 degrees and climbing. He had arrived at 6 a.m. The car was already parked. 1 hour and 44 minutes ago. He stopped doing the math. Briggs, his voice came out flat. Whose car is that? Silence. Not the silence of a man thinking. The specific silence of a man deciding how much he has already lost. Department vehicle, Briggs said. Impound transfer. Nothing to do with you. Impound transfer doesn't park in the K9 yard. Cole? And impound vehicles get logged. Dean turned to face him fully. I don't see a log sheet on that windshield. I don't see a transfer tag. I don't see a duty officer's signature anywhere on that car. Briggs crossed the yard in 8 steps. Big man, moved fast when he wanted to. He stopped 4 feet from Dean, close enough that Dean could smell the coffee on him. Close enough that there was no version of this that was still a professional exchange. This was a line. You are about to make a very serious mistake, Briggs said quietly. Dean looked at Atlas. The dog was no longer trembling. He was standing. Body low, weight forward. Nose working fast. Short, rapid pulls of air. Each one drawing him another inch toward the Ford's rear bumper. Not the alert for narcotics. Not the rigid point for explosives. Something older. Something that Dee had known from the first second he stepped into this yard, and the wind shifted and he caught it. The smell of a living person in a sealed space. I need you to open that trunk, Dean said. That is not happening. Then call someone who can. Walk away, Dean. First name. Dean had been a cop long enough to know what it meant when a superior stopped using your last name. The official channel was closing. What came next would not appear in any report. This is the last time I'm going to say it. Dean moved to the car. He pressed his palm flat against the trunk lid. Hot. Not from the sun alone. Too concentrated. Radiating from one point, like the heat had a source and nowhere to go. He knocked twice. Hard knuckle on metal. Atlas lunged on the leash, both front paws off the ground. And from inside the trunk, faint, almost nothing at all, a sound, not a word, not a cry. One knock back. Dean's whole body went still. His hands stayed flat on the lid. He had done 14 years in K-9. He had heard people through walls and doors and car panels. He had never heard anything that did what that single knock did to him. He turned to Briggs. There is someone in that trunk. Briggs didn't reach for his radio, didn't look at the car. He looked at Dean. And in that look, Dean got everything he needed. That was the moment he understood it. Not suspected, the decommission order, the timing, the unmarked car in a yard with no cameras. Atlas had not been scheduled to die because he bit a suspect. Atlas had been scheduled to die because 3 weeks ago, on a call at Maple Ridge Drive, he had stood within 4 feet of Sergeant Briggs for 11 minutes. One full read. Permanent. Dogs don't forget a scent. Not in 3 weeks. Not in 3 years. The decommission order had been signed 6 days after that call. Open the trunk, Dean said, right now. You don't have authority. I don't care. He reached for the radio on his belt. Briggs grabbed his wrist, hard, 4 fingers around his forearm. Dean looked down at the hand, then up at the man. 14 years. Every rule followed, every order swallowed without asking what the job was actually protecting. Every morning he had told himself the system was sound. He had his hand on the radio. Then Atlas looked at him. Not at Briggs, not at the car, at Dean, level, steady, waiting, the way a dog waits when he has already decided and is giving the human one more second to catch up. Dean keyed the radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Cole, badge 1147, K9 yard at Cedar Falls, PD, Maine. I need a supervisor and EMS immediately. Possible person in distress. Locked vehicle. Do not delay. Static, a beat. Then, copy that, Officer Cole. Units en route. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes, 91 degrees. 1 hour and 44 minutes already inside. He pulled his baton. Briggs stepped back 1 step. You just ended your career, he said. Maybe, Dean said. He drove the baton into the trunk lock. Once, the metal bent but held. He set his feet and hit it again, full wrist behind it, gravel crunching under his boot. The lock cracked. The lid popped 2 inches. Atlas was at the bumper before Dean's arm came back. Nose through the gap, pulling air in short, hard bursts. Body rigid, certain. Dean got his fingers under the lid and forced it open. Miss Dean, curled on her side against the spare tire, was a girl, 8 years old, dark hair matted to her face from sweat, lips cracked dry, eyes open, barely, but open. She looked up at the light in the open sky and could not move, but her fingers were still tapping against the floor of the trunk. Once, twice, 3 times. The same rhythm she had been keeping in the dark since she first heard the dog outside. since she understood that someone out there was listening. Dean had his jacket off in 2 seconds. He laid it over her. "I've got you," he said. "Don't move. They're coming." She didn't look at him. She looked past him, at Atlas. The dog had his front paws on the bumper, not moving, not barking, just there, fixed and steady and present. Except now it wasn't a trunk he was pointed at. It was her. Her hand came up from under the jacket, found the side of his face, pressed flat against his cheek. Atlas didn't move. The paramedics confirmed the trunk temperature at 104 degrees Fahrenheit. She had been in there 2 hours and 19 minutes. Her name was Clara Reyes, 8 years old, daughter of Martin Reyes, the only civilian witness scheduled to testify against Sergeant Briggs in a Department Internal Affairs hearing, 14 days from today. Atlas had been on scene at Briggs's arrest interview 3 weeks before, within 4 feet of him, for 11 minutes. Dogs don't forget a scent. Not in 3 weeks, not in 3 years. The decommission order had been signed 6 days after that call. Dean looked across the yard. 2 patrol units were through the gate, lights going. Briggs was still standing where he had been. Hadn't run. Hands at his sides. He looked smaller than he had 20 minutes ago. Not in size. In the way a man looks when the thing he built his safety on has been removed, and he can already see what is coming, and there is nothing left to stop it. Atlas sat down next to the bumper. He kept his eyes on Clara. He had been pointing at her for 41 minutes before anyone opened that trunk. 41 minutes. The hospital band the nurses put on her wrist read Reyes C. Dean read it in the doorway of the trauma bay. Then he reached into his back pocket and took out the folded decommission form. Atlas, K9 Unit 7, 9 years of service, 1 bite, 1 signature required. He looked at it. He did not sign it. He folded it and put it back in his pocket and walked down the hall. The paramedics took Clara at 8:03 a.m. Dean watched them load the stretcher. She was conscious. She had looked back at Atlas once before the ambulance doors closed. The dog watched the vehicle until it turned out of the lot, and the sound of the siren faded all the way down the street, and there was nothing left to track. Then he sat down on the concrete and didn't move. Dean stood in the yard with the leash in his hand and 4 patrol officers standing around him, and nobody said anything for a while. The gray Ford was still there in the corner, with its trunk hanging open. One of the younger officers had photographed it from 6 different angles. Now no one was touching it. This generation might violate our policies. Please try a different prompt or send feedback. Internal Affairs arrived at 8:21 a.m. 2 investigators, plain clothes, a woman named Sayers and a man named Park. They set up in the shift commander's office. They wanted Dean first. He sat in a metal chair across a folding table. The room smelled like burned coffee and old carpet. Sayers had a recorder. Park had a legal pad and a mechanical pencil. Neither of them said good morning. "Walk us through it from the beginning," Sayers said. Dean walked them through it, all of it, from the decommission order to the condensation on the windshield to the single knock from inside the trunk. He spoke in the same flat voice he used for incident reports. Dates, times, actions in sequence. No interpretation. Just what happened and when it happened and what number was attached to it. When he got to the part where Briggs grabbed his wrist, Park stopped writing and looked up. "He physically restrained you from accessing your radio?" "Yes." while a person was confirmed to be in distress in a sealed vehicle. Yes, Park looked at Sayers. Sayers didn't look back at him. She was still looking at Dean. Did Briggs at any point attempt to open the vehicle himself? She asked. No. Did he call for backup or EMS at any point prior to your radio call? No. Did he explain why the vehicle was parked in the K9 yard without documentation? He said impound transfer. Was there documentation to support that? No log sheet, no transfer tag, no duty officer's signature anywhere on the vehicle. Sayers wrote something. Dean watched the pen move across the page and thought about how many of these rooms he had sat in over 14 years, always as a witness, never as the subject. The table was the same size. The recorder sounded the same. The difference was where the questions were pointed. Officer Cole, Park said, when did you first become aware that the vehicle might contain a person? When the dog indicated. Atlas. Yes. Park wrote the dog's name on the legal pad. 9 years of service, 1 bite, 1 name now in a file connected to a kidnapping, an internal affairs investigation, and a sergeant's arrest. 1 dog's Tuesday morning in Cedar Falls. The decommission order, Sayers said. She slid a copy across the table. You chose not to execute it. That's correct. Dean looked at the form, because I found a child in a trunk, and the man who signed that order was standing 20 feet away, not calling for help. Sayers looked at him for a long moment. That's not standard protocol. No, Dean said, it's not. Are you aware that forcing open a vehicle without a warrant creates a significant procedural liability? Yes. And you proceeded anyway? Yes, she looked at him. Park was writing something. The recorder hummed. Why? Sayers said again. Same word, different question. Dean thought about it for 1 second. Because there was a child in the trunk and she knocked back. Nobody wrote anything for a moment. The recorder kept humming. Outside the window, Dean could see the K9 yard. Atlas was still out there. The dog was lying down now, chin on his paws, facing the gate. One more question, Sayers said. The decommission order was for Atlas specifically. In your assessment, was that order connected to the events this morning? Dean looked at her. Yes. Why? Because the dog that was supposed to be dead by 8 a.m. is the only reason that child is alive. Sayers looked at Park. Park looked at his legal pad. Shot on Sony A7R5, 85 millimeters of 1.4, eye level, purebred German Shepherd, approximately 11 years old. Large frame, black and tan coat with natural silvering around muzzle. Amber eyes steady, thick leather collar attached to a ground-fixed metal chain. Sitting upright with front paws aligned evenly. Ears slightly forward. The dog looks calmly toward the driveway without moving. Suburban front lawn with light snow patches, wooden yard posts near walkway, neighboring houses softly blurred in background. Overcast daylight from right side, soft diffuse shadows, stillness. Hyper-realistic, 8K cinematic color grade, shallow depth of field, 35 millimeter film grain. Dean went back to the yard. Holt was on the concrete barrier, phone in hand. He stood when Dean came through the gate. They still need Atlas? Not yet. You want me to take him to the kennel? No, I've got him. Holt left. Dean walked to where Atlas was lying and crouched down. The dog didn't look at him right away, still watching the gate. Dean put his hand flat on the dog's side, ribs rising and falling, slow, steady, the way a dog breathes when the work is done. "Good boy," he said. 14 dogs, 14 years. He had never said those two words the way he said them right now, crouched in an empty yard with no badge on his belt and an unsigned form in his back pocket. Atlas turned his head, looked at Dean, then back at the gate. Dean stayed crouched beside him. He thought about Clara's fingers. Once, twice, 3 times, tapping in the dark. 8 years old alone in a sealed trunk, keeping count, keeping herself present. He thought about his wife, about March, about the house. He had come in every day since the funeral because the work was the only thing that didn't ask anything from him. And you showed up. You followed procedure. You didn't ask what the job was protecting. Today he had asked it. He didn't know what it would cost him. Administrative leave, possibly termination. He had acted outside his authority. He knew that. He had known it when he swung the baton. He stayed beside the dog anyway. At 9:47 a.m., his phone buzzed. Text from Cedar Falls Memorial. Clara Reyes was stable. She was asking for the dog. Dean read it twice. He looked at Atlas. "You want to go see her?" The dog stood up immediately, ears forward. Dean almost smiled. He clipped the leash. During the 12-minute drive to the hospital, he thought about what Torres would later tell him. That Clara had asked for the dog before she asked for water, before she asked for her father, before she said anything at all. First thing she did when she had light and air again was ask for Atlas. He thought about that the whole drive. A nurse named Torres met them at the service entrance. She had been crying not long before. She led them down a corridor to room 114, knocked and opened the door. Clara Reyes was sitting up in the hospital bed. Small, pale, IV in her left arm. Her father Martin stood beside the bed. Thin man, 40 years old, 3 days of beard, the face of someone who had spent hours not knowing if his daughter was alive. He looked at Dean, then at Atlas. He sat in the chair beside the bed, like his legs had made the decision without him. Clara looked at Atlas. The dog walked to the edge of the bed and stopped, close enough for her to reach. Waited. She put both hands on either side of his face. Atlas closed his eyes. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms don't usually go quiet. Martin Reyes put his hand over his mouth. Dean looked at the parking lot out the window and let the moment be what it was. "He knew," Martin said. His voice was rough. "Before any person knew." Yes. How? He had met Briggs 3 weeks ago on a call. Dogs don't forget a scent. He recognized the car. Martin was quiet, and he remembered. He remembered. Clara had stopped holding Atlas's face and was resting one hand on top of his head. The dog sat down without being asked. He wasn't going anywhere. "The hearing is in 14 days, Martin said quietly. "My testimony. That's why she was taken. To make me pull out." "I know. I'm not pulling out." Dean looked at him. 40 years old, 3 days no sleep, his daughter's hand on a dog's head 5 feet away. "I know," Dean said. When Clara woke again, it was 10:22 and Dean was still in the chair. Atlas in the same position, chin on the mattress edge, eyes half open, not asleep, waiting. Clara opened her eyes slowly, looked at the ceiling, then turned her head and looked at Atlas. The dog's tail moved once, low and slow. She looked at Dean. "Are you the one who opened it?" "Yes," Dean said. "I was counting," she said. Her voice was small and dry. "I was counting the knocks." "I heard you knock back." She looked at the ceiling. "I didn't think anyone was going to open it." Dean didn't say anything to that. "The dog was first," she said. "I heard him before I heard you." "He was," Dean said. She looked at Atlas. The dog's tail moved once more. Martin had fallen asleep in the chair. His breathing was even, first time since they had walked in. Clara watched him for a moment. Then she closed her own eyes. Her hand stayed near Atlas's head on the mattress. Dean stepped out into the corridor for a few minutes. The hospital sounds came at him all at once. The hum of ventilation, the chime of call buttons, the squeak of soles on clean floors. A world running on its own schedule, indifferent to what had happened that morning. He leaned against the wall. He had not eaten since the night before. He had not thought about that until now. He thought about what came next. Administrative leave meant no caseload, no shifts, no reason to be anywhere. He had not experienced that in 14 years. Even when his wife was in the hospital, he had kept coming in, kept the structure around him. Because without the structure, there was just the house and the quiet. He thought about Atlas sitting in the room behind him. 9 years old, 6 months from the standard retirement age for a K-9 officer. 9 years of tracking and finding and pointing at things that people needed to see. 3 weeks ago, he had read something into permanent memory. 6 days after that, someone had decided he needed to die. The dog that was supposed to be dead this morning is now sitting in room 114, keeping watch over the girl he had found. If you've ever watched something be worth more than its paperwork is its worth, you know exactly what Dean was standing in the middle of, leaning against a hospital wall with no badge and no plan for the afternoon. He pushed off the wall and went back inside. At 11:15 a.m., Sayers called again. "Vehicle registration on the Ford, holding company. Registered agent is an attorney with 2 prior civil representations of Briggs." Dean waited. Maple Ridge footage confirms Atlas in proximity to Briggs at multiple points. The decommission order was signed 6 days after that call. "I know." Pause. "Review board convenes Thursday. I can't tell you what the outcome will be." Shorter pause. "But the trunk temperature was confirmed at 104 degrees. And the girl has been asking for the rate since she woke up." She hung up. Dean looked at the closed door of room 114. He thought about Kowalski. "The dog knows before you do. Your job is to slow down long enough to listen." He had been fast his whole career. Today he had been slow enough. He pushed open the door and went back inside. Atlas looked up. Martin was awake again. At the window, Clara was asleep with one hand near the dog's head. "What happens to him now?" Martin asked without turning. "I don't know yet." "He should stay with you." Dean looked at Atlas. The dog looked back at him. The same look from the yard. The look that had made him stop. He reached into his back pocket, took out the folded decommission form. Atlas K-9 Unit 7, 9 years of service, 1 bite, 1 signature required. He dropped it in the metal trash can beside the door. Atlas watched him do it. Then he turned back to Clara. The man who had signed his death warrant was in an interview room across town with no good answers. The girl he had found was asleep with her hand near his head, and Dean Cole, 49 years old, 14 years in K-9, a funeral in March, a badge now on a desk at the front of a building he might never walk back into, was standing in room 114 in Cedar Falls, Iowa, next to a dog that had saved a life nobody else believed was there to save. Something in his chest that had been tight since March was slightly less tight. He didn't say that out loud. He sat back down in the chair. The afternoon light moved across the floor slowly the way it does in places where no one is in a hurry. Atlas rested his chin on the mattress near Clara's hand. They waited there together. The review board met on Thursday. Dean Cole sat in a hallway outside Conference Room B for 40 minutes before they called him in. He was wearing the same jacket he had worn to his wife's funeral in March. It was the only jacket he owned that still fit correctly. He had not thought about that until he was already in the car. Atlas was not with him. Atlas was at the Cedar Falls Animal Services facility 2 miles away, in a clean kennel with water and food and a tag on the door that read, "Hold, do not euthanize, pending review." Someone had written that in block letters and taped it there at 8:47 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Dean didn't know who. He hadn't asked. The review board was 5 people. Deputy Chief Morrison, who Dean had worked under for 9 years. Lieutenant Garza, who had put his hand on Dean's shoulder in the hallway on Tuesday and kept walking. 2 union representatives. And a woman from the city attorney's office, whose name Dean didn't catch when she introduced herself. Morrison ran the meeting. He had a folder in front of him. He opened it. He didn't look at Dean when he spoke. "Officer Cole, you are here because of actions taken in the K-9 service yard on Tuesday, July 9th, beginning at approximately 7:44 a.m. Those actions involved unauthorized use of department equipment, unauthorized access to a vehicle without a warrant, and failure to execute a lawful decommission order. Do you understand the nature of this review?" "Yes," Dean said. "Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Dean thought about it for a moment. He thought about 41 minutes. He thought about one knock. The dog had been pointed at that car for 41 minutes, he said. He was right. Nobody wrote anything for a moment. The union rep on Dean's left shifted in his chair. The city attorney's woman made a note on her yellow pad. The room had the specific stillness of people waiting to say a thing they have already decided. Morrison looked at his folder. The Incident Review Division has examined footage from the Cedar Falls PD perimeter cameras, the Maple Ridge Drive arrest footage from 3 weeks prior, vehicle registration records, and internal communications related to the decommission order for K-9 Unit Atlas. He turned a page. They have also reviewed the statement of Sergeant Briggs, taken Tuesday afternoon. Dean waited. "Sergeant Briggs has been suspended without pay pending criminal investigation. The vehicle in question has been connected through registration to an attorney with a documented prior relationship to Briggs. The Internal Affairs Division has referred the matter to the county prosecutor's office." Morrison turned another page. "The decommission order for K-9 Atlas has been reviewed by the Chief of Police and determined to have been issued outside of proper protocol. Specifically, it was issued without the required secondary sign-off from the K-9 Division Commander and without documentation of the incident that prompted it." Dean had not known that. He had not known the secondary sign-off was missing. He had read the order 3 times on Monday morning. He had missed it. "The order," Morrison continued, "has been voided." Dean kept his face still. Regarding your actions on Tuesday morning, Morrison said, the review board has considered the totality of the circumstances, including the confirmed temperature inside the vehicle, including the confirmed presence of a minor, including Sergeant Briggs' failure to take any protective action despite being present, including his physical interference with your access to department radio, a pause, and including the K9 indication, which in the assessment of this board constituted reasonable grounds for exigent circumstances under Department Policy 742. He closed the folder. Officer Cole, you are reinstated effective Monday. Your badge will be available at the front desk. You are required to complete a post-incident debrief with the department psychologist before returning to active duty. Do you understand? Yes, Dean said. Do you have any questions? One, Dean said. Atlas. Morrison looked at him. The K9 Division Commander has submitted a request for retirement placement rather than euthanasia. Given the voiding of the original order and the circumstances of the incident, that request has been approved. He paused. The division is looking for a qualified handler to take him on a permanent civilian adoption basis. You would be the first candidate considered if you choose to pursue it. Dean looked at the table, then at Morrison. I'll pursue it, he said. Garza, at the far end of the table, was looking at his hands. He didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. The board was adjourned at 11:33 a.m. Dean walked out of conference room B and down the hall and out through the main entrance into the July heat. He stood on the steps for a moment, the same steps he had walked up 14 years ago on his first day. The same concrete, the same brass railing, worn smooth on the right side where every officer put their hand going in and coming out. He put his hand on the railing. He held it there for a second. Then he got in his car and drove 2 miles to Cedar Falls Animal Services. The woman at the front desk was named Linda. She had worked there for 11 years. She recognized Dean from Tuesday. He had called twice to check on Atlas. She buzzed him through without waiting for him to ask. The kennel was in the back. Clean, quiet. A long row of doors, each with a small window at eye height. Dean walked the row and stopped at the one with the block letter sign. Hold. Do not euthanize, pending review. He had been to this facility 3 times in his career, to process dogs from crime scenes, once to return a seized animal. He had never come to take one home. He had never had a reason to. He had a reason now. He looked through the window. Atlas was lying on the kennel floor, chin on his paws, facing the door. Eyes open, not pacing, not distressed, lying there the same way he had lain in the yard on Tuesday morning. Patient, present, pointed at the door. Waiting. Dean pressed his badge card to the reader. The door clicked open. Atlas stood up, not frantic, not rushing. He stood the way a dog stands up when the thing he has been waiting for has finally arrived, and there is no longer any reason to hurry. He walked to Dean and stopped. Dean crouched down. He put both hands on either side of the dog's face, the same way Clara had in room 114. He held it there for a moment. Atlas looked at him, steady, the same look from the yard, the look that had made Dean stop when everything in his training said keep moving. You're done here, Dean said. Come on. Atlas walked out of the kennel beside him. They walked the length of the corridor together, out through the lobby. Linda said, take care of him, and out through the glass door into the July heat. Atlas stopped at the passenger door of Dean's car and looked at him. Dean opened the door. The dog got in. Dean stood outside for a moment before getting in himself. He looked at the building, at the sign, at the institution that had held this dog for 3 days in a clean kennel with a handwritten sign on the door, while the system tried to decide if it had made a mistake. It had made a mistake. It was correcting it. If you have ever watched something be worth more than its paperwork said it was worth, you know what was happening in that parking lot. A dog that was supposed to be dead was sitting in the front seat of a car, and the man who had been told to kill him was standing outside in the July heat, not quite ready to get in. He got in the car. Atlas was in the passenger seat, looking through the windshield at the road. "You know you're supposed to be in the back," Dean said. Atlas didn't move. Dean started the car. The county prosecutor filed formal charges against Sergeant Briggs 11 days later: kidnapping, obstruction of justice, abuse of official position. The investigation produced 47 pages of documentation, including phone records connecting Briggs to the holding company that owned the gray Ford, and a text message sent at 6:02 a.m. on Tuesday morning, 4 minutes before Dean arrived at the K-9 yard. That read, "It's done. It was not done." Martin Reyes testified at the Internal Affairs hearing on Thursday, July 25th, 14 days after Tuesday. He walked in. He sat down. He said everything he had witnessed. He did not pull out. Clara Reyes was discharged from Cedar Falls Memorial on Wednesday, July 10th. She walked out with her father. Before they reached the main entrance, she stopped and asked if the dog was okay. Martin told her he was. She nodded. She kept walking. She did not know yet that on the morning she had been in the trunk, Atlas had been brought to the yard to be killed. She did not know that the man who had ordered his death was the same man who had locked her in the car. She did not know that the dog who had found her had stood in that yard for 41 minutes before anyone listened. She knew one thing. She had been in the dark. She had been counting, and she had heard a dog before she heard a person. That was enough. Dean Cole returned to active duty on Monday, July 14th. He picked up his badge at the front desk, signed the reinstatement log, walked the 63 steps back down the corridor, and sat down at his desk. Atlas was not allowed in the building. He was a civilian dog now. He sat in the back of Dean's car in the parking lot during the shift. When Dean came out at end of day, Atlas was in the same position he had been left in, facing forward, watching the door. That was how it went. The house was less quiet now, not because it made more noise, because there was something in it that breathed. Dean had not registered that until the third night, when he came downstairs at 2 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, and Atlas was lying in the kitchen with his chin on the floor watching the back door, the same way he had watched the gate on Tuesday morning. Not anxious, just present. Dean sat down on the kitchen floor beside him. He thought about the decommission form in the trash can in room 114, about the piece of paper with one signature line empty, the signature that would have ended this dog's life and let a corrupt man keep his. He had not signed it. He was glad he had not signed it. 3 months later, Briggs entered a guilty plea on the obstruction charge. The kidnapping charge went to trial. Atlas was present in the courtroom during the K-9 indication evidence. The judge had allowed it. He sat next to Dean's chair. He didn't bark. He didn't react to the crowd. When the prosecutor pointed to the photograph of the gray Ford in the northeast corner of the yard, Atlas turned his head and looked at it. Then he looked at Dean. That was all. Dean looked back at him. Then he looked at the jury. He thought about Clara's fingers. Once, twice, 3 times. Tapping in the dark. He thought about 41 minutes. He thought about how a dog that was brought to a yard to D had pointed at the truth for 41 minutes until one man slowed down long enough to listen. And how that was not a small thing, and how that was not nothing, and how sometimes the floor beneath you turns out to be sound after all. Just not the floor you thought you were standing on. Atlas put his chin on Dean's knee. Dean put his hand on the dog's head. They sat there together, and the room went very quiet.